October 20th, 1944. 2:15 p.m. near Ericourt, France. The gunner's periscope vibrated as Hans Muller pressed his eye against it, straining to identify the unfamiliar silhouette emerging from the autumn haze 1,500 meters away. For 2 years, he had memorized every American vehicle profile. The high-riding M4 Sherman with its short 75mm gun. The M10 tank destroyer with its sloped armor and open turret. Even the new M18 Hellcat that raced across battlefields at impossible speeds but carried the same ineffective 76mm gun. But this was something else entirely. Das ist kein M10, he whispered into the intercom. His voice carried a tremor that his crew had never heard before. That's not an M10. Through the periscope, he could see the massive gun barrel. It was longer and thicker than any American tank gun he'd encountered. The turret sat open-topped like an M10, but everything about it seemed wrong. The gun mantlet was more massive. The barrel extended far beyond what any 76mm gun should. His mind raced through recognition charts, training silhouettes, and intelligence briefings from just days ago. Nothing matched. Range 1,500 meters, his gunner reported. Should I engage? Muller hesitated. At this distance, his Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate any American armor. The mathematics had always been simple. German tanks killed American tanks at range. American tanks died trying to close the distance. It was the arithmetic that had kept him alive through France, through Belgium, and now into Lorraine. But that gun barrel troubled him. It looked almost like the 88mm flak guns he'd seen defending the Reich. But that was impossible. The Americans would never mount an anti-aircraft gun on a tank destroyer. Would they? In exactly 12 seconds, Hans Muller and his crew would become among the first German tank crews in history to discover that the Americans had done exactly that. They had mounted a 90mm anti-aircraft gun on a mobile platform that could kill any German tank at combat range. The American vehicle fired first. The 90mm M3 gun spoke with a sound Muller had never heard from American armor. The armor-piercing round traveled at 853 meters per second. It crossed the space between the two vehicles in less than 2 seconds. The projectile struck the Panther's frontal armor at the hull machine gun position. The 80mm armor plate that had deflected dozens of Sherman rounds in Normandy split like paper. The 90mm shell continued through the crew compartment. The driver died instantly. The radio operator never knew what hit him. Muller had just enough time to realize that everything he thought he knew about American tank destroyers was wrong before the ammunition began to cook off. For 2 years, German tank crews had lived inside machines that seemed to violate the fundamental rules of armored warfare. Their superiority was not just perceived but mathematical. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate 140mm of armor at 1,000 meters. At that same range, the Tiger's 88mm gun could punch through 165mm. These numbers weren't propaganda. They were proven on battlefields from Kursk to Normandy. The American response had been consistently inadequate. The M10 Wolverine, their primary tank destroyer, carried a 76mm gun that could only penetrate 88mm of armor at 1,000 meters. Against a Panther's 80mm frontal armor angled at 55 degrees, the M10 needed to close within 500 meters for any chance of a kill. Against a Tiger, the odds were even worse. The mathematics of survival were simple. German tanks engaged at 1,500 meters. American tank destroyers died trying to reach 500 meters. This technological gap had created a psychological fortress in the minds of German tank crews. They had developed standard tactics that exploited their advantage with ruthless efficiency. Position the tank hull down on a ridgeline. Let the Americans advance across open ground. Begin engagement at maximum range using superior optics. Destroy 3 or 4 vehicles before they could close to threatening distance. Withdraw to the next position. Repeat. The system worked with deadly precision. A single Tiger could hold up an entire American advance. The most famous example had occurred at Villers-Bocage in June 1944. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's single Tiger destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 other vehicles in less than 15 minutes. Though Wittmann himself would die in August 1944, months before the first M36 Jackson arrived, his legacy reinforced the myth of German invincibility. The psychological advantage extended beyond individual engagements. American tank destroyer crews had developed what German intelligence called Panzer fever. They often mistook any German vehicle for a Tiger and reported far more heavy tank encounters than actually occurred. Meanwhile, German crews painted kill rings on their gun barrels like fighter aces. Some Tigers displayed 30 or 40 rings, each representing an Allied vehicle destroyed. The assumption of American technological inferiority ran deeper than just firepower. Wehrmacht intelligence consistently reported that Americans had chosen quantity over quality as a permanent doctrine. They would produce thousands of adequate vehicles rather than hundreds of superior ones. This made sense to German thinking. It fit their worldview. The Americans were merchants and factory workers, not warriors and engineers. Even the newer M18 Hellcat hadn't changed this calculation. Yes, it could reach speeds of 55 miles per hour. Yes, it could potentially flank German positions. But it carried the same ineffective 76mm gun and had armor so thin that German 20mm anti-aircraft guns could penetrate it. Speed without firepower was just a faster way to die. German tank crews in the autumn of 1944 had no reason to believe anything had changed. Intelligence briefings from October 15 still listed American tank destroyers as minor threats requiring only standard engagement protocols. Unknown to German tank crews operating with such confidence, 8,000 kilometers away in Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, American engineers had been working since June 1942 on a project that would shatter every assumption about U.S. tank destroyer capabilities. The project began with a simple observation from North Africa. American forces were encountering German Tigers that seemed immune to every gun in the Allied arsenal. The solution came from an unexpected source. The U.S. Army had been using the 90mm M3 gun as an anti-aircraft weapon with impressive results. Someone at Aberdeen asked the obvious question. If this gun could destroy aircraft at 30,000 feet, what could it do to a tank at 3,000 feet? The mathematics were compelling. The 90mm could fire a 24-pound armor-piercing round at velocities exceeding 2,800 feet per second. Theoretical penetration charts suggested it could punch through 120 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. The project received the designation T-71. Later, it would be called the M36 Jackson after Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. The name choice was deliberate. Jackson had been known for striking hard and fast where enemies least expected it. The parallel would prove prophetic. Converting the concept into reality presented massive technical challenges. The M10A1 chassis would serve as the base, but everything else required redesign. The turret had to be completely reconstructed to handle the 90mm gun's recoil. The gun mantlet alone weighed nearly a ton more than the M10's entire gun assembly. Engineers had to recalculate weight distribution, redesign the traverse mechanism, and strengthen the turret ring. Ammunition storage posed another problem. The 90mm rounds were significantly larger than the 76mm shells the chassis was designed to hold. Each round was nearly 3 feet long and weighed 24 pounds. The standard M10 could carry 54 rounds. The M36 would carry only 47 despite the redesigned storage. Every inch of internal space had to be reconfigured. Production began at Fisher Body Division of General Motors in April 1944. Workers at the Grand Blanc Arsenal in Michigan were told they were building an improved M10 variant. Components were manufactured in separate facilities to maintain secrecy. The gun came from one factory, the turret from another, the chassis from a third. Only senior engineers understood the complete design. American Locomotive Company joined production in May. Their Schenectady plant had been producing M10s and could quickly convert. Montreal Locomotive Works added Canadian production capacity. Between the three facilities, production reached 100 units per month by June 1944. The secrecy was extraordinary. Training documents referred to it as a heavy tank destroyer without specifying the gun caliber. Shipping manifests listed them as M10 variants. Even the crews selected for training at Fort Knox were initially told they would be operating improved Wolverines. By D-Day, 500 M36 Jacksons sat in depots across America and Britain. They were wrapped in canvas, labeled as maintenance equipment, and hidden behind rows of regular Shermans. The Americans were waiting for the perfect moment to reveal their secret. That moment would come in the killing fields of Lorraine. The first M36 Jacksons arrived in France on September 2, 1944, assigned to the 631st Tank Destroyer Battalion. They came ashore at Utah Beach under cover of darkness. Each vehicle was draped in canvas to hide the distinctive long barrel. Orders from 1st Army Headquarters were explicit. The new tank destroyers were to be employed only against German heavy armor and their existence kept secret as long as possible. Captain James Miller commanded the 1st M36 platoon to sea combat. His crews had trained for 6 weeks at Fort Knox on the new vehicles. They understood both the weapon's power and the importance of surprise. Miller ordered his men to add foliage to their gun barrels when moving through towns. At assembly areas, they parked between regular M10s with guns pointed away from German reconnaissance routes. The concealment lasted exactly 43 days. On October 15th, near Nancy, the secret war ended. A Panther from the 11th Panzer Division appeared on a ridgeline 1,400 meters from Sergeant Robert Collins' M36. Collins had been tracking the Panther for 30 seconds, waiting for authorization to engage. When it came, he fired a single round of M82 armor-piercing ammunition. The 90mm shell traveled the distance in under 2 seconds and struck the Panther just below the gun mantlet. The German tank exploded in a pillar of flame visible for miles. Within 5 days, the killing accelerated. At Ericourt on October 20th, M36 Jacksons claimed 19 German tanks in a single afternoon. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion recorded the action in detail. Engagement ranges averaged 1,300 meters. Every German tank was destroyed with frontal shots. Not a single M36 was lost. German after-action reports from Ericourt revealed complete confusion. Tank commanders reported being engaged by Super Wolverines or long-gun M10s with impossible penetration power. One surviving Panther gunner swore he had been hit by an 88mm gun. Another claimed the Americans were using captured German weapons. Nobody could explain how American tank destroyers were killing Panthers at ranges where return fire should have been harmless. Wehrmacht intelligence struggled to process the conflicting reports. On October 22nd, Panzer Group West issued a bulletin warning of possible new American tank destroyers with enhanced armament. But they still assumed it was an upgraded 76mm gun with special ammunition. The concept of Americans mounting a 90mm anti-aircraft gun on a tank destroyer was so foreign to German thinking that it wasn't even considered. Staff Sergeant Clyde Counts demonstrated what German crews were truly facing on October 25th. In a 15-minute engagement near Fraines, his single M36 destroyed 3 Tiger tanks at ranges between 1,200 and 1,800 meters. Each Tiger was struck frontally. Each was destroyed with a single round. Counts later reported that the German tanks seemed to hesitate before engaging, as if their commanders couldn't believe an American vehicle was threatening them at such range. The intelligence failure was complete. German tank crews were dying without understanding what was killing them. By early November 1944, rumors of the new American weapon spread through German tank units like wildfire. Tank crews gathered in maintenance areas trading stories that grew more terrifying with each telling. Americans had flak guns on tracks. They had captured and copied the German 88mm. They had received British 17-pounders mounted on tank destroyers. Every theory was wrong, but the uncertainty was paralyzing. The psychological impact manifested in ways German commanders had never seen before. Panther crews that had once advanced confidently now requested infantry reconnaissance before engaging any American tank destroyer. Tiger commanders who had previously exposed their vehicles at 2,000 meters to draw enemy fire now remained hidden. The simple silhouette of an open-topped American vehicle could halt an entire German advance. The identification crisis made everything worse. At combat ranges, the M36 Jackson looked remarkably similar to the M10 Wolverine. Both had open turrets, sloped armor, and similar profiles. The gun barrel was longer on the M36, but at 1,000 meters through a periscope, that difference was nearly impossible to detect. German gunners had seconds to decide whether they faced a harmless M10 they could destroy at leisure or an M36 that could kill them instantly. This uncertainty created what American intelligence later called Jackson fever. Every tank destroyer was reported as having a long gun. Panzer units began claiming they faced entire battalions of the new super-destroyers when often only a single M36 was present. A November 12 report from the 116th Panzer Division claimed they had engaged 20 new American heavy tank destroyers near Metz. Post-war records showed only 3 M36s in that entire sector. The tactical paralysis was unprecedented. German doctrine had always emphasized aggressive action and technical superiority. Now both foundations were crumbling. Tank commanders who had built their careers on decisive armored attacks found themselves hesitating at critical moments. The mathematics that had governed every engagement were now variables in a deadly equation. Veterans described the psychological shift in stark terms. Feldwebel Ernst Bauer of the 2nd Panzer Division later recalled the moment his unit learned about the 90mm guns. "We had been told for 3 years that American tanks were toys. Suddenly we discovered they had built something that could kill us at any range. It was like learning the enemy had developed invisible ammunition. Every bush might hide death." The abandonment rate told its own story. In September 1944, before the M36 appeared, German records show that most knocked-out tanks were destroyed in combat. By November, nearly 30% of German tank losses were listed as abandoned due to mechanical failure. Investigation after the war revealed many of these vehicles had minor problems that crews would have routinely repaired weeks earlier. A thrown track, an overheated engine, or low fuel became excuses to bail out rather than risk encountering an M36. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated the complete psychological reversal. Hitler's last great offensive depended on German armor punching through American lines quickly. The plan assumed German tanks would dominate as they had in 1940. Instead, German tank crews advanced cautiously, constantly watching for tank destroyers. When the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion rushed their M36s to St. Vith on December 18, the psychological impact was immediate. A company of King Tigers from the 501st SS Heavy Tank Battalion had been advancing confidently against what they believed were standard American forces. The first 90mm round struck the lead King Tiger at 1,600 meters, penetrating its frontal armor. The remaining German tanks immediately withdrew despite outnumbering the American tank destroyers 4-1. The production mathematics revealed a truth that would have shattered any remaining German morale had they known it. By war's end, American factories had produced 1,413 M36 Jacksons. Fisher Body Division completed 940 units at their Grand Blanc arsenal. American Locomotive Company added 473 units from their Schenectady plant. This meant American monthly production of M36s alone exceeded what Germany managed for all Jagdpanzer types combined. The comparison was devastating. Germany produced only 415 Jagdpanthers during the entire war despite it being their most successful tank destroyer design. The mighty Jagdtiger, with its 128mm gun and 250mm of frontal armor, saw only 88 units completed. German factories needed 6 weeks to build a single Jagdtiger. American workers completed an M36 in 4 days. The penetration statistics told another story. The M36 standard M82 armor-piercing round could penetrate 119 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. This was enough to destroy any Panther or Tiger I frontally at normal combat ranges. But the real shock came with the M93 HVAP rounds. These tungsten core projectiles could penetrate 157 millimeters at 1,000 meters. Even the King Tiger's 150 millimeters frontal armor was now vulnerable. German crews never understood that they were facing American industrial democracy at its peak efficiency. While German factories struggled with slave labor, material shortages, and Allied bombing, American production lines ran 3 shifts continuously. Workers who had built cars in 1941 were now assembling tank destroyers with the same methodical precision. The irony was profound. The M36 Jackson had significant weaknesses that German crews never exploited because they were too terrified to engage closely. The open turret made crews vulnerable to artillery and infantry. The armor was only 25 millimeters thick on the sides and rear. German 20 millimeters anti-aircraft guns could have penetrated it at close range. The vehicle suffered from mechanical problems, including transmission failures and differential breakdowns that sidelined many units. But psychological warfare doesn't require perfect weapons. It requires breaking the enemy's will to fight. By December 1944, only about 500 minutes and 36 seconds were operating in the European theater. Yet their presence affected every German armored decision. Tank commanders who didn't know if any M36s were within 50 miles still acted as if they were behind every hedge. The kill ratios, when finally calculated after the war, stunned military analysts. M36 Jacksons achieved approximately 4 German tanks destroyed for every M36 lost to enemy action. This wasn't because the M36 was invulnerable. It was because German crews had become so fearful that they avoided engagement, surrendered more readily, and abandoned positions rather than risk facing the 90 mm gun. Post-war interrogations of German tank crews revealed the depth of psychological impact. Oberfeldwebel Kurt Meyer of the 9th Panzer Division told American intelligence officers that learning about the 90 mm tank destroyers was when we knew the war was truly lost. If Americans could build these weapons while still producing thousands of Shermans, what else were they hiding? Veterans consistently identified the M36 appearance as their breaking point. Not the strategic bombing, not the numerical superiority, not even the collapse of the Eastern Front. It was discovering that Americans had quietly built something that could kill them at any range that shattered their last hope. The M36 Jackson stands as testament to a fundamental truth of armored warfare. The greatest armor isn't measured in steel thickness but in the ability to strike first and furthest. German tank crews who had stalked Allied armor with impunity for 3 years discovered in autumn 1944 that American engineers had built their nemesis. The hunters had finally become the hunted.